and gentlemen, boys and girls, how are my snipers doing today? I hope you guys are doing fantastic. Listen up, ladies and gentlemen. You guys might notice I have some lines on my charts. Look, man, starting now, we are going to use a little bit more of indicators and certain tools just so it's easier to explain to some of you guys. Look, I'm still going to do in-depth analysis, but I'm already going to cut down on it just a good amount, just because I realized, even though I understand what the hell I'm saying, I'm using all these terminologies and all this and this, and I understand for some of you guys, it might just be overwhelming. So, I decided to pull up one of the most common indicators. Now, here's the thing. This indicator, right? These default settings are actually pretty bad. Like, they're really, really bad. So what did I do for us? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can see, bam, right? I made a pack-a-punched version of it, a way more accurate version. Now, I'm still going to be using my own technical analysis, my own skill to this, because I don't really need these indicators. They're still an extra confirmation tool for me. I don't mind, but it's something for you guys to understand, something that's just a little bit easier to understand, right? So we can see, right, we have this indicator over here. And if we compare it to the last one, even just as an example, actually before I do, we can see every time the red line goes below the green, okay, remember this, every time the red line goes below the green, that means we are bearish. Every time the red line goes above the green, that means we are bullish. Okay, so very, very simple rules. Now, we won't live and die by these rules, obviously, because sometimes when things are rangy, we can see the chart does get a little messed up. Okay, so we'll still be adding context. We'll still be adding value from my knowledge and stuff about the charts, but we'll also be having these lines. And we can see, right, when things started to reverse, it already broke out here in the middle of April the 14th, and there's been no indication that we are reversing, right? And if we go to this, we can see it has been much more sloppier here, right? It's much more sloppier, much more delayed. These are the ones, this is what the other YouTubers use. I personally think the settings are awful. In fact, I know they're awful, and I don't need weeks and weeks of evidence to finally be like, oh yeah, we're bullish, right? Boom, goodbye, hello chart. So we're going to be covering the markets, and something we're going to be covering is talking about two annoying gaps that exist. Okay, so if you guys don't know, the market gap sometimes, especially for the Bitcoin futures. Okay, so if we go and look and go on the hourly time frame, right, ladies and gentlemen, we can see that over here, right, over here, Friday, June 25th, around, what is that, 2 p.m., right? We can see 2 or 4 p.m. I'm blanking out. 14 is 2, 15 is 3, 16 is 4. I knew I was making a mistake. So we can see there's actually a big gap at $105,000, roughly there, which is very, very annoying, because every time there's a gap, there's a high chance that we do pull back to that area. Okay, so extremely, extremely annoying, which means things might get delayed in terms of our 91-day liquidity. And to make matters worse, right, we do have a gap around $92,000, right? We can see, ladies and gentlemen, that boom over here, there is a gap, right over here. There's a gap at $92,000. So very, very, very annoying. But here's the deal. The gap doesn't necessarily have to get filled if the markets don't want to. In fact, the gaps can stay for the next time there's going to be a bear season. And yes, eventually there will be a bear season. I still don't believe, the reversals and everything are in. I know some people think the tops are in. Personally, I don't think so. I do not think so. Now, would I complain if the tops were in and altcoin season was going to start very, very soon and we're still going to have very, very good explosive pumps? No, not necessarily, but I would think that, Bitcoin still had a little bit more in the tank than it did this bull run, despite it going from 65K up to 110K, right? I still think this Bitcoin has a little bit more in it, like an extra 30, 40, 50K at the bare minimum, especially global liquidity has been popping off in recent times. But look, ladies and gentlemen, right? Well, if we go to the daily, right, for Bitcoin, we can see, right, there is zero confirmation right now that we are reversing in terms of the indicator. When we go to the weekly candle, right, go to the weekly candle, we can see that there's a gigantic wick, right? Very, very big rejection candle that flipped eventually bullish. It was bearish and it flipped bullish. So, we do expect pumps. Now, like I said, there is a gap around $104,000, $105,000. And the gap, right? I remember this, the gap is right over here. Here's the deal, people. If there is going to be a type of pullback, it is going to most likely be a flash crash type of pullback where it just kind of fakes us out, right? It just fakes us out, but there's nothing to really worry about. Here's the deal. Bitcoin in 4 to 6 hours can drop from 109 to 104.5, right? And then within another couple hours, it could just pick back right up. We've seen it here before. We've seen it here, right? Bitcoin was at $107,000. A couple hours later, it was at 102,000. Half a day later, it was back at its previous numbers, right? So you can see the markets do like to bait. The markets do like to bait. But when we go on the higher time frame, right, daily, still looking fine. There's absolute zero confirmations of any pullbacks in terms of the candles, in terms of the indicator. Even when we go to something like the weekly, I mean, we have been bullish pretty much this whole time. See, this indicator is built so well that even when we did have these big dips, the red line barely went under, right? It barely went under. So that is why also technical analysis is important, but that's why it's also like, well, if it just goes slightly under, doesn't necessarily mean we are going to be bearish right away, right? So we can see there has been practically zero, confirmation that we've been bearish on a very, very high time frame since the beginning of 2023. And we can see, right, although this indicator didn't catch the reversals right away, it did catch them around, 45 to 50K, right? Some people thought this leg over here, right, this leg back in March of 2022 was going to be a pump to the upside. But guess what? Indicator said no. Obviously, technical analysis and other candles said no. And then we can see we sold off very, very aggressively. So this indicator, right, it is beautiful, right? Same thing here in 2020. Once we kind of crossed above 8,400, we never really had any issue, right? Slight little fake out here, sure, but that's when you have to zoom in and use your own skills. And then boom, we can see very, very nicely. And yeah, once again, since the beginning of 2023, there has been zero. I mean, zero pretty much indication that we are going to be selling off, that we are bearish, right? Like I said, the closest it got to is like break even or slightly under, which it does not matter. It does not matter. So ladies and gentlemen, right, overall, I'm still very, very bullish. Gaps are here. Gaps are annoying. I don't think the 92K will be filled. I do think if it does get filled, it's going to be for next cycle. I don't even think next cycle we're necessarily going to retest off of this huge area just because we were here for, 7.5 months. But coming back to fill up certain imbalances, right? Coming back to fill up like an imbalance between the 86 to 92K zone, that's where I can see definitely Bitcoin going back down in the future. But as of right now, it is just bullish, bullish, bullish. Now let's see how this works with some other charts, right? Let's go to something like Bitcoin dominance. We can see, right? Despite there being a few fake outs, Bitcoin dominance still is bullish, right? Even though right now it is a little iffy, I will say it is a little iffy. It is still remaining bullish in terms of the indicator. And we can see, right, when altcoin season started to kind of go nuclear, right when it was already consolidating before actually the big dump, it was already indicating that, yeah, the big dump for Bitcoin dominance is coming and there will be a massive altcoin season. Now, once again, right, it's not perfect. Already here, right, once it fell off from the 70% zone, it technically already kind of started like a mini altcoin season, like the preparation started. But like I said, I'm still here to give you that proper analysis and to back it up. We could check, right? We could check for other things like the total market cap, right? The total market cap. Everything still indicates that the total market cap is going to be very, very, very bullish, right? Only a handful of times it kind of crossed a little bit. Sure, on Bitcoin is slightly tighter, but overall, we get the general picture. Overall, it looks fantastic, and I still expect this to really, really blow up. I do expect one of the biggest altcoin seasons, and not only altcoin seasons, but in general, I do expect one of the biggest pumps. In fact, we can even check how far it could potentially pump using these two trend lines. So I'll do this one first, right? I'll do this one first because some people do value when it goes from this top to this top, but then I'll also do one where it is, right, kind of just respecting these two areas. Now, this one is a lot higher. This one is a lot higher because of the specific, the way it is trending up, right? It is much more to the upside, but we can see, right? Even if by the time, let's say we pop off and go to, November time, maybe October time, we could be potentially peaking into 6 trillion market cap. So, just to keep an eye out. But if we do respect this trend line more, right, which is hard to say, it's always hard to say now, then we could be potentially still going up to 7 or even 8 trillion in terms of the total market cap. So I expect, many, many more pumps to come. I'm really, really still optimistic. In terms of altcoins, we could check this too, right? We go to the others dominance. Altcoins show no indication of any reversals on the weekly, right? Even on the daily. The daily is actually a little bit more closer, right? The daily is slowly trying to flip, but it hasn't crossed yet, right? We can see it has crossed once in recent times, but when we look at the weekly, it was a fake out. My bias is still that we will probably drop a little bit lower to roughly 6.80 to 6.50% before we get that huge confirmation. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that is practically it. I hope you guys did enjoy. This is just a quick market overview, right? Just also an information type of video. Hopefully you guys like the indicator. Maybe I'll change one of the colors. We'll make things a little better, but hopefully you guys see it. Hopefully it's really clear. And yeah, love you guys so much. I'll talk to you guys next time. Goodbye. Portfolio reviews, economic and global updates and news, frequent up-to-date technical analysis, and a very supportive community. Sell and buy calls and trading education is provided. If that sounds good to you, now is the time to act. Once the markets start moving, there is no I should have, coulda, woulda. Now is the time. If you want to take things to another level, we have the blueprint that covers everything from A to Z in crypto that you need. No fluff, no bullshit, just the most important news, fundamentals, and technicals to have you succeed in these markets.